The sentence of this court is life without the possibility of parole. Silence stays on the bench for a count of 3. Wood against wood leaves a dry echo. His smirk vanishes like a coin palmed by a magician there. Then, not. The boy who spent weeks performing boredom for cameras looks suddenly older than 17, and somehow smaller. He stares past the gallery doors as if they still open to a version of the world that owes him escape. A chair legs scrape. A woman rises. "Your Honor, I need to speak." She is steady. She is finished with crying. A deputy hesitates, then steps closer to the rail. Freeze. A doorbell camera shows a porch cut into lake night. A 9-year-old slips by with a towel for a cape, feet quick on wood. A second figure follows. Taller. Deliberate. The lens catching a chain's small whisper. The frame tips to black as motion moves off its edge. No splash. No shout. Just footsteps. Then the light hum of a compressor in the porch fridge. By the end of this story, you will understand why a glance, not a wound, did the work here. Title card blinks. We rewind to the night. The lake at North Cross, Wisconsin, holds autumn like a private memory. Maples on the shore confess first. The bait shop sells hot chocolate again. Friday nights at the high school sound like an old radio found in a warm garage. Cabin Row, so called by locals, though most cabins wear steel appliances and tasteful decks, rings the northeast bend. 23 houses. 2 docks for everyone that can afford a boat, and 1 family that still washes their uniforms at home. Inside the Clarke A-frame, a dishwasher hums a steady circle. Citrus cleaner rides the air with laundry warmth. 3 school portraits crowd a mantel because parents measure time by rectangles. Emma left for college 2 weeks ago. Mason, 17, auburn hair that never quite stays still. Learned early to turn trouble into a smile, and a smile into permission. Noah, 9, is all knees and new teeth, and the genius of believing that rules can be negotiated by running faster. 10 more minutes, then bath. Erin calls from the kitchen, thumbs busy with a text to her sister about a doctor's appointment she keeps forgetting to schedule for herself. On the coffee table, Noah is assembling an amphibian from bricks that were never asked to swim. Mason hovers near the door, half watching his brother, half watching the rectangular world on his phone. He keeps the doorbell app open more than he admits. Surveillance makes him feel both important and invisible. Neighbors will later say they heard nothing strange. Of course they didn't. The strange often sounds exactly like ordinary life continuing. Noah wants the water. He wants it the way boys want something that told them yes all summer. The air has thinned into a late September cool. A soft warning across skin. Just to the dock, Erin says. Feet only. Mason's eyes flick, not toward his brother but toward that small digital frame where the porch will be soon. "I'll take him," he says. And Erin exhales the grateful breath of a parent who thinks for this interval that help has arrived. At 10:10 p.m., the doorbell camera records light drawing a yellow triangle on boards. Noah's towel catches the light like a sail. Mason fills the doorway behind him in the geometry of a big brother. His wallet chain whispers against denim when he shifts. A spring-style choice he defended into fall because it annoyed exactly the people he wanted to notice him. There are crimes that arrive with sound. There are crimes that begin with an absence. The lake receives both the same way. Perfectly. The path from the porch to the dock is 9 treated planks down to a gravel lip. The camera's wide angle sees only the first 4. The rest belong to night. Race you. Someone laughs like there's an inside joke, which there is. Footsteps leave the rectangle of light. Audio keeps what the lens can't hold. Wood underweight. 2 gates. A chain's dry click. In court, the state will later play 29 seconds that show almost nothing at all to a casual eye. Jurors will squint into a black rectangle and wonder if the prosecution is wasting their time. A moth ghosts the edge of the frame, working a geometry more faithful than most men. Then just at the corner there is a slice of reflective water that trembles once and then smooths, as if the lake has practiced stillness longer than the camera has practiced sight. The 911 call starts at 10:14 p.m., Erin's voice is breath and syllable. My son, my little one, he fell, he's in the water. Send someone, please. She runs her words in a straight line to the night. The dispatcher asks, Is he breathing? Erin does not answer that question because the question is made of a world that no longer applies. Deputies from the North Cross Sheriff's substation are 5 minutes away if the light on County Road J cooperates. It doesn't. It never does. The first unit clears the turn into Cabin Row at 10:19. A second pulls in behind as if doubling sight might fix time. Flashers stir houses where people had already decided tomorrow would be a better day to be concerned. Search lights widen the world like arguments. Mason stands at the end of the dock. Jeans soaked at the shin, breathing too evenly for a boy who just went into dark water in early fall. He slipped, he says. We were messing around, he slipped. He is careful with the verb, because care has always been his trick. Erin kneels on boards that will leave dents in her skin like cancelled plans. Eyes on the water's skin like it might return something if watched correctly. A deputy unrolls a throw bag. Another calls for the volunteer dive team on the county channel. A neighbor arrives with a kayak as if speed can be made into shape. The lake holds its breath, because it has no obligation to do otherwise. Noah lies in the gravel 8 minutes later, pulled to the lip by 2 men whose arms will ache in 2 hours and whose sleep will be unreliable for a week. Erin says, baby, in a voice that does not rise. A deputy begins compressions with a steadiness that belongs to practice and prayer. Mason stands 1 step back from the choreography and tells the deputy when asked what happened. He ran ahead. He jumped from the edge and slipped. I tried. I didn't see where he went. These are sentences built like fences. Straight, simple. Designed to keep certain animals in and others out. Paramedics take over. Sirens do not change physics. They never have. At 10:47, a medic speaks softly to a colleague and then to a mother. Erin shakes her head once, and then again, as if volume could rewrite fact. The lake gives nothing else back. Detective Sergeant Lila Whitaker arrives at 11:09. She has the walk of someone who knows how to move past crying without teaching herself not to care. The first thing she instructs a deputy to do is cut the porch light and take stills of every angle the doorbell camera can see. The second, she logs the chain of custody on a temporary receipt so clean you could frame it. She looks at the dock, the gravel, the water wrinkling at the shore, and then at the boy with wet jeans and dry hands. Walk me through from the door, she says to Mason. He does not ask for a parent. Erin is there, but not here. She is sitting on the porch steps with a blanket someone brought, hair damp from leaning over the lake. Whitaker keeps her voice the way you keep an instrument in a case. Slowly, she says. No adjectives. He tries a smile first. It serves him often. It fails here in the way jokes fail at funerals. We went to the dock, he says. He slipped. I tried to grab him. It was dark. Shoes? Whitaker asks. He looks down as if surprised to find them. I kicked them off on the dock. She points to the boards where water is still pooling from work gloves and effort. The shoes are not there. They are on the porch where he put them earlier in the evening, neatly side by side like someone who knew he might narrate later. She says nothing. She looks at his hands again. The backs are dry. The palms are unread. The chain at his belt glints like a punctuation mark that wants to end the sentence. At 11:26, Whitaker stands in the kitchen and watches a deputy pull an SD card from the doorbell unit. He gloves every step. He announces each movement into the deputy's body cam by habit. Removing faceplate, Phillips head. Retrieving micro SD. Placing an evidence envelope, B7. Sealing with initials L, W, 23, 28. Cases are lost inside sloppy minutes. Whitaker builds tight minutes like bridges. Back on the porch, she plays the clip once on her phone with Erin beside her. The mother flinches at seeing earlier versions of the same hour. I can't, Erin says. Whitaker nods. You don't have to. She asks for any other cameras. Erin points at a baby monitor still plugged into Noah's room from nights when thunderstorms made sleep complicated. Mason's face does not move at that word complicated, but his breath thins. At 12:07, an assistant district attorney in sweatpants answers a call and says, If you think exigent applies, take it. Will paper consent in the morning? Whitaker takes it. She pulls routine from the shelf where the law keeps it and applies gently. She tells Aaron, "We need to collect phones." Aaron hands hers over like something already fallen from her hands. Mason's phone is in his pocket. He hesitates and then gives it, finger hovering an extra half-second over the glass, as if leaving a fingerprint that says, "I was here, willingly." At 1:50 a.m., Mason sits in interview 2 under a ceiling that believes in honest light. A youth advocate sits with him because the law wrote that into this state's policy after a case 6 counties away went poorly. The advocate's presence gives everything a layer of care that will later be examined like a contract for hidden terms. Whitaker reads Miranda with a pace that respects both understanding and sleep. Mason nods that he understands. He signs with a hand that does not shake. He tells a story you could balance a book on. He uses direct objects carefully, like someone who rehearsed which nouns are safest. He went out in front. He slipped on the edge. I went in. I couldn't find him. It was dark. Whitaker lets the story breathe. She leaves silences in places where untruths usually grow anxious and need to fill space. Mason taps the chain at his belt once, as if to check for a rhythm he can trust. The advocate glances at his hands and says nothing. Because advocates are not permitted to shape content, only to watch the shape of people as content moves through them. At 2:17, Whitaker places a still photo on the table. It is from the doorbell clip. The rectangle of porch, Noah's towel at the edge of the steps, the corner of Mason's shoulder. In the bottom right, the sliver of water that ripples and then smooths. "What do you see?" she asks. He shrugs. The shrug is a practice tool. It says, "I am both harmless and too young to explain physics." She places a second still. The porch. 2 minutes later. Mason's shoes line up by the mat. "What do you see?" He says, carefully, "My shoes. Where were you standing when you took them off?" "On the dock," he says, very softly now, because the dock has already asked him to tell the truth, and he is trying to refuse politely. At 2:26, she slides the last item for this session. A printout of a text message from earlier that evening, to a friend named Cash. The county IT specialist pulled it under exigency, flagged with a timestamp the law finds reasonable. The words say, "Can you even imagine the quiet if you didn't have to share?" There is a skull emoji. There is a laugh emoji. Screenshots are louder than voices. Mason looks at the page like it has betrayed him by refusing to be a joke. "It was a joke," he says anyway. At 10:12 p.m., "What did you mean to do?" Whitaker asks. He holds the air in his lungs as if he can keep time inside. His eyes blink once too slow. Then he says a sentence so small it almost escapes notice. "I wanted him to be still." The recording system prints a soft red dot in the corner of the screen. The youth advocate shifts. Whitaker does not smile. She speaks the next words in a register that belongs to record. "You're saying you intended to put him where he could not move?" He tilts his head. He cannot compose a better answer quickly enough. "I wanted him to learn," he says. It sounds like a teenager imitating an adult, imitating a judge. At 3:04, Whitaker shuts down the formal interview. She does not push for more because pushing breaks chain of custody in ways that bad defense lawyers learn to exploit, and good ones will not need to. She logs the statement. She writes the words, "Partial admission," in clean block print. She goes home and stands in her dark kitchen, and pours water from the tap and does not drink it for a minute because night needs to stop echoing before morning can start. By 7:30 a.m., the Clarke house has moved from the category residence to scene. Yellow tape is patient with wind. A forensics van breathes its equipment smell into the hallway. A crime scene tech photographs the chain at Mason's belt, and then photographs it again on a neutral background. Another tech collects drift marks on the dock boards where rubber met wet grain. A small square of gravel reveals scuffed impressions that might be knees or might be chaos. The lake says nothing and is right to do so. Aaron sits at the dining table with a paper cup of coffee that refuses to cool. She signs consent forms because someone has printed her name on the line and left a space. She asks, "Do I need a lawyer?" A victim services coordinator answers in a voice trained to honor both meanings of protection. "You need time." At 9:15, an assistant principal from North Cross High leaves a message offering condolences and asking whether the school should lower flags. It is not protocol, but small towns believe in gestures proportionate to their geography. At 9:26, the district attorney, Paul Avery, takes a briefing. He is precise without decoration, a man who prefers exhibits to adjectives, and whose tie knots look like decisions. He listens to the 911 call, watches the doorbell clip twice, reads the interview transcript once, and says, "We'll file for detention and petition to try as an adult. File the motion before lunch, and make sure every chain of custody line reads like a sermon." At 11:40, deputies serve a warrant on Mason at his grandparents' bungalow, where he was taken after the night shortened into morning. He does not resist. He says nothing. He allows his hands to be cuffed in front because policy for juveniles is different until it isn't. Aaron watches from the doorway and makes the sound that grief makes when it remembers it has a throat. Arraignment happens in a beige room that believes in fluorescent clarity. The judge assigned to initial appearances is not the one whose name will become part of community vocabulary later. This judge reads quickly, sets detention at the county's juvenile facility, orders no contact with the victim's immediate family, and instructs counsel to appear at a transfer hearing in 2 weeks. A reporter from the county ledger takes notes with the reverence of someone who has not had much to write about since the 4th of July parade rained out. The defense attorney who walks in the same afternoon is named Dana McKinnon. She is what people mean when they say public defender, in a tone that contains both misunderstanding and a quiet debt. She introduces herself to Mason in the interview room at detention with a legal pad and 2 pens and a patience that has survived harder teenagers than him. She says, "I need you to not speak to anyone but me, ever, about the facts. Not your mother, not a friend, not a ceiling. Me." He smiles, automatically. "So, you think I'm funny? I think you're a client," she says. "And I think the state is going to try to make you a cautionary tale. My job is to put the caution back where it belongs, on the state's burden." McKinnon's initial strategy is the sketch public defenders are required by both ethics and hope to draft: a juvenile brain, an impulsive act, the possibility of rehabilitation. She calls a psychologist she trusts not to perform pity but to measure function. She calls 2 teachers who have known Mason since middle school and asks for stories that look like potential. She does not promise Aaron anything except this: "I will tell the truth about where the law gives mercy and where it doesn't." Quite nos into the 25. Across the square from the courthouse, in an office that still smells like the carpet company that moved out last year, Paul Avery assembles a team the way engineers assemble a bridge. Load-bearing first. Detective Whitaker anchors. A digital forensics analyst, Wesley Cho, will parse the phones. A trace evidence tech, Carla Jimenez, will read the doc like a diary. An assistant DA, Monica Pelt, will manage discovery and the 1,000 places where small losses accumulate. Avery's strategy is simple enough to fit on a note card. Show the jury that the defendant's own choices and words eliminate accident, and then let him eliminate sympathy himself. The transfer hearing becomes a rehearsal for narratives. The defense brings the psychologist first. He speaks about developed reward systems and risk perception in adolescent males, about executive function still under construction. He says, neurodevelopmental and remediable and supportive environment. He does not say, "This boy is safe," because he cannot. The prosecutor asks whether empathy that must be taught after an act can be trusted before the next one. The psychologist answers the way professionals answer when words are scalpels and the operating room is public. Carefully, with disclaimers. With a plea to consider time as medicine. When the state calls Detective Whitaker, she does not perform. She narrates. She explains chain of custody like a liturgy. Who touched what? When? With which gloves? She plays the doorbell clip without commentary. She reads the interview line where Mason says, "I wanted him to be still." She does not add a shrug. The judge at transfer, Honorable Ruth Ellison, has a face that teachers recognize. She listens as if stillness is a resource she collects. When argument closes, she speaks in sentences that would look good carved on a courthouse. "The law asks me to weigh 2 truths. that children are not yet finished, and that communities must be kept safe. There are cases where those truths can live together in juvenile jurisdiction. I do not find this to be one. She signs the adult court transfer order. Mason does not smirk. He does not look at his mother. He rolls his shoulder where the chain sometimes taps and watches the pens travel as if ink might change direction. The pretrial months teach everyone a new calendar. Discovery arrives in packets and waves. The digital forensics report surfaces texts that look like heat coming off asphalt. Quiet if you didn't have to share. Attention is earned. A search for how long can someone hold breath cold water? Offset 2 days by a search for what to say when someone falls in lake. The defense files a motion to suppress the interview, arguing that the presence of a youth advocate was insufficient protection, that exhaustion and shock compromised voluntariness. The state answers with case law that has never been anyone's favorite bedtime reading, and with a recording that shows a boy who understands enough to be artful. Judge Ellison holds a hearing on suppression. She asks questions like a carpenter checking plumb. She listens to the advocate describe the session. He was coherent. He asked to use the restroom once. He nodded that he understood rights. She asks Whitaker whether she raised her voice or promised any benefit. Whitaker says, simply, no. Ellison denies suppression. She writes that the statement was admissible, a conclusion that becomes a new weight on the scale everyone pretends not to see. Media finds the story the way birds find cables. A single still from a courthouse hallway, Mason in orange, half smile at an angle he maybe cannot help, becomes the county ledger's most clicked page of the year. A regional TV segment coins a phrase it will use too often, the smirking teen killer. McKinnon files a motion to change venue. Ellison denies without prejudice but adds a note. The court will reconsider if voir dire demonstrates saturation. It is the sort of judicial sentence that means, not now. The week before trial, Aaron brings McKinnon a box of photo albums and says, they'll need to remember he was 9. McKinnon lays the photos out and looks at Noah with ice cream on his face, with a gap in his teeth, with a cardboard sword at a birthday party that did not know what kind of future it was sending people toward. We will show the jury the human cost, McKinnon says quietly. Aaron nods, then pauses at a picture where Mason, 12, holds his brother over his head in the shallow end of a pool while Noah squeals. They loved each other, she says. The sentence tries to be a refuge. It becomes, instead, an exhibit neither side will use. Trial opens on a Monday that still smells like Friday night football. The courtroom learns new rituals. Bailiffs move like sentences you can't appeal. The gallery divides into people who bring tissues and people who bring notebooks, and one man who brings both. Jurors file in with faces that already know they will be quoted at dinner tables later. Avery rises for the state. He says he will show facts arranged like bricks, each small, each necessary, each supporting a weight that cannot be placed on sympathy. He promises the jury that they will hear the defendant's own voice explain intention. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. McKinnon stands for the defense. She asks the jury to sit with discomfort. A child who made an awful choice. A family that must not be broken into 2 categories. One to pity, one to condemn. She says words like impulse and immaturity, and no prior record. She tells them that rehabilitation is not a fantasy, but a system, and systems work when courts believe in them. She does not promise an acquittal. She promises context, which is the nearest neighbor to mercy that the law allows. The state calls its first witnesses, the dispatcher who took 911, the deputies who worked the shoreline, the paramedic who spoke gently and then formally. The lake comes into the room by way of nouns, dock, gravel, throwbag, compressions. The jurors write those words as if they are learning a language they hope never to speak again. When Whitaker takes the stand, the room holds itself differently. She testifies like someone who has learned to respect both silence and the record. She narrates the collection of the doorbell SD card, how many screws, what tool, what time, who observed. She plays the clip. She points out the flutter at the frame's edge, where water trembles once and then smooths. She does not say this is the moment. She lets the lens limitations make the jurors lean forward on their own. Then Avery plays the interview. I wanted him to be still. The sentence hangs. Jurors look not at the screen but at Mason sitting at counsel table, who does not look at them. The youth advocate's face appears in the corner of the frame. He is a reminder that systems try. On cross, McKinnon does not attack Whitaker. She invites the jury to consider what interviews extract at 2 a.m. You chose not to stop the interview even though he is 17, she says. Because he had a youth advocate, Whitaker answers. And because he consented. And because you heard what you wanted, McKinnon suggests calmly. Because he said what he said. Whitaker replies without heat. The exchange is the kind that committee hearings quote when they are feeling philosophical about budgets. The state's trace evidence tech, Jimenez, testifies next about the dock. She explains scuff patterns as if decoding a language the lake left behind. Here, she says, pointing to a photo. We see parallel abrasion consistent with a drag toward the waterline. McKinnon asks whether panic could make marks the same way. Jimenez answers honestly. Yes. Panic can read like intention in wood grain. Avery lets the possibility sit, then stands to ask, and what about the alignment with the edge? That alignment, Jimenez says, is tidy. Juries know tidy. They recognize it too often in places it doesn't belong. The digital analyst, Cho, brings the phones to life. He shows the text to Cash on a big screen. Can you even imagine the quiet if you didn't have to share? He shows searches in a staggered timeline. He shows the doorbell app usage, the habit of opening the lens to make the rectangle of world smaller, contained, owned. McKinnon asks whether searches don't sometimes reflect curiosity more than intent. Cho answers the way good experts do. Individually, yes. In sequence, they tell a story we should at least consider. By the second week, the narrative is no longer competing for center. It sits there, normalized by repetition. McKinnon calls her psychologist. He explains brain development with diagrams that look like weather maps. He does not play for pity. He asks for time. Avery rises and asks him whether time given to one boy can be taken safely from a community. The psychologist says, safety isn't a pie we divide. It's what we build when we understand why people do what they do. It's a lovely sentence. It sounds softer than policy allows. Two teachers take the stand. They tell about a boy who could be charming and cruel in the same week, who learned how to enjoy reaction the way some kids learn violin. They try to frame it as attention, hunger you can feed with structure. Avery asks how well their strategies worked around younger children. Silence is sometimes the best cross-examination. During a recess, a hallway camera catches Mason's face as he leans toward a bailiff and says something like a joke. The bailiff does not laugh. A still image from that second becomes a small storm online. The half-smile returns under headlines that know exactly what to do with it. McKinnon files a renewed motion to change venue. Ellison denies again, but expands voir dire for alternates. She adds a note in the record. Jurors are instructed to avoid media. The court assumes compliance until proven otherwise. Assumptions are small, stubborn boats. On the morning of closing, Erin sits in the front row with a tissue she doesn't use. Beside her is Thomas, the father, who has looked like a person translated by grief into a language he does not speak. On the other side sits Amy, aunt, sister, the one who will deliver the victim impact statement if it comes to that. She looks at Mason the way someone looks at a locked door in a fire. Avery closes like a person who builds. He stacks the bricks he promised. He does not tell a story about evil. He presents a narrative about choices made over minutes and weeks. The doorbell habit, the text, the searches, the chain on denim, the shoes moved before a version of the story made them inconvenient, the line, I wanted him to be still, which the law understands in only a few ways. He reminds the jury of the instruction on intent, that they may infer intent from actions and circumstances. He says the word accident once only, the way you say a town you passed through and did not stop in. McKinnon closes, as if speaking to 12 neighbors across a fence. She asks them to remember their own 17 and the stupidities that felt like genius at the time. She asks them to hear, I wanted him to be still, as a childish attempt to make a little brother calm, not a plan. She says a sentence that will be quoted online with cruelty. We do not throw away children for being unfinished. Then she adds the sentence that will be forgotten. We finish them with help. The is actually designed. Jury instructions land like snow, quiet, covering, changing shapes. The jurors go out. They do not take long. You will hear people say later that they decided before lunch. The foreperson will tell a reporter that deliberations were orderly. When the verdict returns guilty on the top count, Mason watches the floor. His face is finally empty. This is not paper-thin remorse. It is a person who has discovered that the story he planned to tell about himself cannot be published in this jurisdiction. Sentencing arrives 2 weeks later after reports and schedules, and a community that has worn fresh grooves in its routines around a courthouse. Victim impact statements begin. Amy walks to the lectern with a page that looks like it was rewritten 6 times, and then burned 3 of those. She speaks in a voice that has learned clarity because sobbing wastes time. She tells the court that Noah collected smooth stones like promises, that he mispronounced hippopotamus on purpose to make adults laugh, that his bed still smells like the shampoo he hated. She says, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here so his name is said more than once. Then Aaron stands. Your Honor, I need to speak. The court allows it. She looks at her son, and then at the judge, and then at a corner of the room where a plant tries to believe a window is enough. We raised him in a house where consequences were always tomorrow, she says. We confused love with rescue. We taught him he could make noise, and we would make quiet. I am not here to ask for mercy for him. I am here to confess what we built. Mason breaks then, not into tears but into heat. You're doing this now? He says, half rising, the chain at his belt, flashing like a last little Sunday. A bailiff places a hand near his shoulder but does not touch. The judge lifts a palm, and the room stills. McKinnon closes her eyes the way counselors do when they know a client has just moved the needle the wrong direction in public. Judge Ellison speaks last. She does not sermonize. She remembers what she said at transfer and says it again in a fuller register. We live in a time where too often we do not finish what we start. That cannot apply to accountability. The jury found you caused your brother's death with intent to put him beyond movement. The law allows this court to impose life without the possibility of parole. I have read everything provided. I have listened to what was said and what was not. The sentence of this court is life without the possibility of parole. The gavel finds wood. The sound is smaller than television makes it. Mason's face opens to its first true fear. It looks like a boy finally meeting the idea that days come, one at a time, and do not negotiate. The doors close behind deputies. The lake holds what it knows, and refuses to testify further. He had always told himself that he could narrate the world into compliance. Words had worked since kindergarten. A joke here. A nickname there. A willingness to talk faster than adults could react. In middle school, he discovered that an eye roll plus a smile could turn detention into a warning. In high school, he learned that appearing bored could make teachers move the spotlight away, and that appearing attentive could bring it back when he wanted it. The variable was not conscience. The variable was attention. Attention is a currency that spends you when you think you are spending it. When Mason was 12, a counselor suggested he try track. He liked the applause. He did not like the distance between the starting pistol and the clapping. He learned to false start, to grin, to make it a game. When he was 15, a teacher wrote that he had leadership qualities because he could make 3 boys move their chairs without raising his voice. He did not lead them into work. He led them into laughter. It reads the same on paper until a principal looks too closely. Noah had been born into Mason's performance. The family video archive is filled with a teenager stepping into frames that were not his, a running commentary on a life he was not asked to narrate. Say it again, Mason would tell his brother, and Noah would, because attention has gravity. Mason liked to be the satellite that made tides without noticing the cost. People would later talk about the chain on Mason's belt like it was some noir prop, an emblem of attitude. It was only a chain. But it clicked in doorways and hallways and kitchens. It announced his presence with a small metallic laugh. In the courtroom, that sound never appeared. Jurors never heard it. Yet when Whitaker said, "We heard a chain," The jurors' imaginations supplied its ring, built a theater where sound cues do work, that evidence sometimes cannot. Whitaker's report was careful to stay clinical. Subject presented with flat affect at scene, tone even, narrative consistent in structure, inconsistent in detail. She did not write down what she thought when she watched Aaron pressing her hands together, as if friction could summon a different timeline. Detectives are permitted private thoughts. They are not permitted private procedures. Her chain of custody lines land on the page, the way winter lays down frost. Insistently. Covering. Making edges clearer. By making them briefly the same color. Avery's office put together demonstratives that were almost boring on purpose. Juries, he believed, should never be entertained by the state. He showed timelines with rectangular blocks and clean fonts. 9:52 p.m. Text about quiet. 10:10 p.m. Door opens. 10:12 p.m. 30 seconds off camera. 10:14 p.m. 911. 2:17. A.M. statement. I wanted him to be still. He resisted the urge to make arrows too red, circles too accusatory. He trusted accumulation. McKinnon, reading the same sheets, felt the familiar grind of being asked to find mercy in a machine. She called colleagues and asked for case numbers that looked like this but ended better. They sent her two. In one, a confession had been tossed for a technical failure in Miranda. In the other, a family had refused to testify against their own, giving a jury permission to believe in repair. Neither applied. She sat with Aaron twice a week and learned the family's calendar, what punishments were applied when, how often later, did the work of know, how many small rescues had overwritten consequences. She did not judge in the room. She could not help judging on the way home. At school, boys who had once admired Mason's ability to collect moments like baseball cards began to say they never liked him. Memory bends around power. A girl who had been pushed once in a hallway by Mason's trying to be funny remembered the floor much more clearly now. The group chat memorialized both brothers with different kinds of emojis, a dialect of grief and relief and cruelty that adults always misread. In detention, Mason learned how to schedule a day without a phone. Time itself was an irritant. He tried to trade the program into entertainment by being the kid who could make line staff smile. Some did. Most did not. He asked McKinnon when he could plead to something smaller. She told him the state was not offering smaller. He told her, without smirking, that juries could be charmed. She told him that juries could also be very, very tired of boys like him. Voir dire started with questions that sounded simple. Do you watch true crime television? Do you believe teenagers make different decisions than adults? Do you own a doorbell camera? It moved, like all good voir dire, into places where people discover what they think out loud. One man cried, describing a nephew's accident. One woman bristled when asked whether she could ignore what she read online and said, I can't promise. She was thanked and excused. 12 stayed and promised what jurors promise. To hold law above feeling, and then to let feeling whisper which law to hold. The trial transcript will read like a long river, with stones named Exhibit 12 and Defense C. But in the room, what happened felt like weather. Air pressure shifting when Whitaker said, admission. A temperature drop when the doorbell clip trembled. A small warmth when a teacher smiled describing Noah's Lego amphibians. The judge moderated the climate. Ellison's voice could do something rare in courtrooms. Make silence feel structural, rather than punitive. When she instructed counsel to move on, they moved. When she told Mr. Avery, we won't need to see that again, he did not press. Jurors love a judge who seems to love the process more than her own authority. Behind everything sat the question the hook had promised. Why did a glance become a verdict? The answer assembled itself cell by cell. The state did not need to show lungs or water or time to loss. It only needed to show that a boy who knew how attention worked had arranged a moment where the world narrowed to a rectangle and then stepped just outside it. The jury was not asked to stare into the dark and see horror. They were asked to stare into the dark and see arrangement. On the defense side, the moment that mattered most happened not on cross, but in a conference room the night before closing, when Aaron said, quietly, "I can't keep pretending he is someone he is not." McKinnon did not ask what that meant. She knew. Parents who rescue become accomplices to the next cliff. Aaron would speak at sentencing. She would not apologize for her son. She would apologize for herself. McKinnon did not script it. She did not need to. Aaron had been writing it with her life for 17 years. The state's last witness before it rested was the medical examiner. He did not paint, he placed facts. Cause of death consistent with submersion. No blunt trauma inconsistent with scene. Bruise on forearm possibly from grip. Timeframes that matched the call. He used words that did the clinical work without exporting images into the jury's heads. He said, consistent with, he avoided, must have. Avery left it there. McKinnon asked whether fear could account for the bruise. Yes. The examiner said, fear moves people into things. The jury wrote, fear. It did not erase the word still. After verdict, after sentence, after the clip had been played and replayed in living rooms and group chats and minds, North Cross did what towns do when the storm's headline moves on. It returned to potholes, and bake sales and budget meetings, and a school board election that felt suddenly symbolic to people who rarely cared. The lake did not lower for the loss. It held autumn, then ice, then spring again. A small ceremony in May placed a bench near the public access. The plaque read Noah's name and 2 dates, and a line that had been argued in the family, and then chosen for its ordinary grace. He liked to skip stones. Whitaker visited once, not to stand at the bench but to look at the water from the angle where she had first seen the porch light write its yellow triangle. She did not imagine alternative endings. Detectives who survive learn to not do that too often. She thought about the chain. She thought about small sounds that carry far when the room goes quiet. Then she went back to work. Because work was the only way to return hours to their proper size. Avery received 3 emails that week calling him a hero, 2 calling him cruel, and 1 from a retired judge that said only, "Good record." He saved that one. He is not sentimental. He is a man who files things. But once, late, he replayed the interview line again and heard, in the boy's voice, something like, surprised that words were not performing their old magic. He closed the file. He did not write that down. McKinnon visited Aaron twice after sentencing. There is no legal requirement to do that. There is only the ethic of remembering that defense is not just for defendants. Aaron asked whether she could send a letter to her son. You can, McKinnon said. He might not reply for a while, Aaron said. I won't ask him to. Then, she folded a piece of paper and wrote Noah's name on the outside and placed it in a drawer. Mason discovered that prison is a facility built for the one lesson he refused. Limits. He counted days since you cannot trade them. He learned that charm is a small currency in a closed economy. He kept his chain in a property bag he could not access. He thought about silence and what it feels like when you don't control it. He would tell himself at night, in the way boys talk to themselves when the room is less friendly than any they've ever known, that there had been a mistake. He would rehearse the words that once moved adults like furniture. Accident. Slipped. Dark. The words stayed where he put them now. They did not get up. He did not sleep better for having stacked them neatly. What the case left in the culture of North Cross was not a song about evil but a memo about habits. Doorbell cameras still sold well. Parents still said be careful at the top of driveways. But there were fewer rescues from small consequences. Detention became a word spoken earlier in households. The high school's student handbook added a paragraph about restorative practices that tried to teach attention without letting it become currency. It was a good paragraph. It did not fix adolescence or lakes. It was, like law, a way to say aloud what we think might help if we say it together. On an anniversary no one marked, Whitaker drove past Cabin Row on her way to a different call. The maples had confessed again. The wind chime on the Clarke porch did not sound. Someone had taken it down. The doorbell unit had been replaced with a newer model that sent clouds to the phone when the sky moved. The lake held the sky the way it always had, with an expression no court will ever be able to describe into sense. There are stories that want to end with forgiveness, because audiences like architecture, that returns them to rooms with soft chairs. This one ends with a bench. It ends with a sentence the judge spoke and a sentence the boy did not anticipate and a sentence the mother finally said out loud to the only court that mattered to her. The one in her own house, where tomorrow became today, and then did not move when asked. In later filings that no one read except appellate clerks and students assigned to learn from records, the defense raised issues that were always going to fail. They argued the youth advocate should have been a parent or lawyer. They argued venue should have moved because a hallway still had taught the county what smirks mean. They argued that "I wanted him to be still" was ambiguous enough to hold innocence if you tilted it toward affection. The appellate court, in language both polite and immovable, affirmed. It cited cases that are old and will grow older and remain in use because they bind more than they explain. No one appealed the judgment that was not written, that enablement has a price tag with small daily print. Erin did what most parents do when they realize how many coupons they have used to excuse behavior. She started paying at the register. She joined a group for families of offenders where people say sentences that would ruin dinner parties and find they are not ruined when said to the right faces. She told the group, "I taught him to believe that love is a delete key." The room nodded because many had, in other languages, taught the same. Avery moved on to a case about stolen catalytic converters, and another about a bar fight in winter that went sideways on ice. He carried the Clarke file less and less in his briefcase, and more in the way he asked younger ADAs to write their motions. Clean, unadorned, respectful of record. He told one, "We do not need adjectives when evidence can do the lifting." It is another sentence that sounds like doctrine, and is, in fact, a small mercy. Adjectives have sharp edges. They cut the wrong throats if wielded for long. McKinnon took on a juvenile shoplifting case and fought a principal who wanted to make theater out of punishment. She won that one. The boy wrote an apology that sounded surprisingly like a beginning. She thought about sending Erin a note that said, "Some kids learn," and then did not, because grief does not read well when addressed. The bench with Noah's name weathered. The plaque dulled and then brightened when someone rubbed it with a sleeve. A child sat there once with a bag of smooth stones and learned to skip them with a grandparent who will die 3 years later. The lake received each throw as if brand new to the idea of circles. If you ask why the narrative you have just heard matters beyond one family, one county, one courtroom, the answer is simply that law is made of stories pretending to be rules. We want procedure to be steel. It is, often. But it is also the arrangement of small human choices. To announce each evidence step aloud, to ask one more question at 2:17 a.m., to not add one more adjective at closing, to let a mother speak when she stands. Those choices shape outcomes as surely as statutes do. If that feels unsatisfying, if you want a lever big enough to move results without touching people, you are not thinking of courts. You are thinking of math. There is a moment if you replay the doorbell clip where a moth cuts across the frame and then continues into dark without hitting anything. Viewers often misremember that as hope. It is not. It is a moth. But there is hope, if you want it, in the idea that attention can be taught to serve, rather than to demand. A boy learned the worst version of attention and paid a price that will not be discounted. A town learned to give a different kind. It is not redemption. Redemption is a word better kept in places with stained glass and volunteers who whisper. This is adjustment. Adjustment changes fewer headlines and more afternoons. In prisons, there are programs that ask men to write letters they will never send. Mason wrote 3 to a brother who will not read them. The first was argument. The second was explanation. The third was a sentence long. "I wanted you to be still because I wanted to be the only noise." He signed it and then did not sign it because he did not know whether names are a privilege. He put the page in a bin. A counselor read it and did not say it was progress, because counselors who last do not put flags on hills that move. On a winter day, Whitaker walked into a courtroom for a different case and felt the air change when a mother stood. She always feels that now. She thinks of Aaron each time and wonders whether she would speak the same way in different futures. She has learned not to answer her own questions about that. She writes reports that feel like well-built furniture. She teaches a class to young detectives on chain of custody where she says, "Do not be dramatic. Drama is expensive in court. Be exact. Exactitude is cheap and pays well." They laugh. They remember the line. They will use it on nights when drama calls to them like a lake. The judge, Ellison, began to be quoted more often in news stories that had nothing to do with the Clarke case. Reporters like judges who seem like lines in a poem. She did not enjoy it. She adjusted her sentences to be plainer in chambers and discovered that plainness can be misread as hardness. She did not change back. She wrote opinions that adolescence is not a shield and that adulthood is not a sword. And then she wrote sentences that did not read like that at all. She signed orders knowing that signatures are the least of what a judge does and the most anyone sees. There is a story some of the deputies tell new hires when they get to North Cross. It is not about monsters. It is about a night when the lake did what bodies of water always do, and when people did their jobs. In the story, the chain of custody works. The motions are argued. The jury returns. The judge speaks. The door closes. The deputy telling it always ends with, "We did the small things right." The new hire always asks, "Did it matter?" The deputy says, "It matters to the record." Sometimes, later, the new hire learns that that is enough. If you find yourself wanting punishment to do more than separate, you are a person with a politics the law cannot hold in its hands. The law can separate. It can censure. It can deter a little, and teach a little, and memorialize a lot. It cannot raise the drowned, and it cannot rewind the night to 10:11 p.m. That is the lake's business. And the lake does not do business with anyone. The world loves headings. Courts love lines. Families love names. This case ends where all three meet. A line under a heading with two names. One receives flowers. One receives a DOC number. In the ledger the county keeps, both are recorded. It is not fair. It is not meant to be. It is meant to be accurate. Accuracy is how we show respect when kindness would be a lie. The sound you heard at the beginning, the gavel was smaller in person than in your mind. Television is generous. Real rooms are stingy with echoes. But take that sound with you as a metronome for how communities decide what they will live with. A gavel is a tiny hammer. It fixes nothing. It announces what is already built. The building is the work we did before it fell. The last image is easy because it is true. The deputies walk Mason out. His face is the face of someone who believed he could speak past a wall, and has met a wall that does not answer in his language. The door shuts. The camera, if there were one, would pan to the window where a slice of sky sits quiet above a lake he cannot see. The bench near the public access is unoccupied. A child will sit there this afternoon and practice skipping stones. The circles will be perfect until they are not.